Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Back with us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you with us.
It's nice to be back with you, Sarah. Always a pleasure to get together and talk weather here, and probably more so with maybe a degree of comfort in mind for most folks who have wrapped up harvest, except for maybe crossing the T's and dotting the I's here across the heartland.
Exactly. And for those of you that are joining us, please post any questions you have there in the chat. Or if you're joining us from social media, you can put those right in the chat area on your screen. So, Greg, we've got some snow in the forecast here in the Midwest. We've
Yeah.
got some bomb cyclone hitting the
Yep.
Pacific Northwest, bringing some high risk of flooding to that region. Lots of things to talk about. So,
Yes.
what's on your radar screen?
Well, that's pretty much it, boy. We've been kind of spoiled rotten to the core across a good part of the plains and Corn Belt with these very balmy, uncharacteristically mild days and the heat, almost that summer-like heat that we had for October. Yeah, it really wrapped up any significant moisture opportunities and really dried out the grounds. But except for I think parts of Wisconsin, I think we're down to just single digits left in corn and soybean harvest, and we're beginning now finally with that complete to get some soil moisture back in the ground. So we'll take a look at that as we move through the next half hour. But yeah, onto the highlights here. First, across the Corn Belt, yes, it is a marked change to some colder weather. Been watching snow showers and flurries are as close in as eastern Iowa this afternoon, but still 50-degree warmth as far north as about the I-70 corridor. But kind of a shockaroo to man and beast with a return to really more seasonal, more typical late November, early December weather here going forward for the next couple of weeks. And snow, about 3, 4, 5 inches worth into the eastern parts of North Dakota and western Minnesota the past 24 hours. Again, some of that will spread southward, and it's conceivable as maybe as far south as Springfield, Champaign, Indianapolis, maybe Columbus, Ohio. Colder surfaces might have an accumulation here, slushy buildup over the next couple of days. So yeah, a little more typical rude awakening out there compared to what it's been here of late. Meanwhile, on the plains, as we just talked about, the wind-driven snow showers and flurries across the Red River Valley of the north, in contrast to that same west-northwest wind flow where we have not had significant drought improvement. That's over the high plains areas. We're keeping an eye on fire potential for parts of Nebraska and sections of Kansas and South Dakota. But there will be a significant change in that weather pattern going forward as well over the next couple of weeks. The southern states, again, things have quieted down. The last remnants of really a tropical system was Sarah, that was kind of sheared apart by winds up aloft. It has brought some rainfall to parts of Florida and into the southeastern states. And for a change, the first time in months, the tropics and the Atlantic are relatively quiet. Folks who kind of watch the peanut and sugarcane harvest across Louisiana on the Delta, very dry down there with an absence of any tropical system. So they are ahead of the game with harvest operations as well. That bomb, by the way, as you pointed out, bombing is kind of a rapid deepening of low pressure systems. It is typically done and found off of New England. People talk about these nor'easters. Well, sometimes within about a half day, they'll go from nothing to just tightly wound circulation. We can sometimes do the same thing, but a lot of times those systems have already formed up in the Gulf of Alaska. So it is a rapid deepening of low pressure, and that just whips the wind around off that frictionless surface of the Pacific. And so you've got 70, 80 mile an hour winds. I think there's like 700,000 customers without power around the Seattle area. And the atmospheric river, back when we started watching this stuff, and I kind of grew up in the weather business knowing as the old Pineapple Express, but in any event, the western states getting too much moisture all at once. So you come up with 20 inches of rain, it's going to run off the mountains. You come up with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 feet of snow in the Cascades and Sierra. Well, you come up with landslide potential, but it is at least moisture out there. It looks like that pattern will continue on into the weekend and early next week as well. Onto the drought monitor, and again, we kind of put things in comparison. This is a far cry from what we have right now, but back in late May, there's the look. Virtually nothing except for parts of the Southwest and Great Plains. Upper Midwest was improved as well. Much of the Corn Belt through the Northern Plains, but by mid-November, because of that dry October and the rapid advance and ahead of the game on harvest operations and kind of a delayed winter wheat planting season as well. I think that's been picked up and moved along nicely because of recent moisture in the plains and southern Corn Belt. In any event, this is the November 12th drought monitor, and it is pretty horrible looking. That's why we hope we can get, and we think we will continue to get weather systems that are initially wet or wet snow, and there's not a lot of frost or freeze, or at a minimum, we're a thaw-free cycles. That's sometimes not great with rutting and heavy equipment usage and livestock movement, but this is what we see right now. There should be some improvement in the forecast, both on our end and the government end continues to be that of a little more positive nature. We'll have an updated monthly outlook. I think that comes out at the end of the 30th of November, and the seasonal outlook as well on the 30th of November. But at least from the folks who put together the drought monitor, there is the shades of beige to green, meaning a forecast of drought improvement. Well, we've seen it over some areas of the plains and some areas of the Corn Belt, a ways to go. And again, we'll talk about the longer range forecast, which does look very positive if you think of it as a positive turn to getting moisture in the ground, improving tile line running before things firm up and freeze up. Well, this is the way I think weather will be playing out. So this is the rest of the month of November. Same on the seasonal outlook around here that has, again, a promise for some additional moisture over much of the southern winter wheat belt, much of the Corn Belt, into the upper Midwest, and even to the Pacific Northwest. So that's kind of a quick wrap, Sarah, on the headlines and drought conditions across the country. And again, any other year, I think we'd be kind of biting our nails with harvest operations. Probably typically are just beginning to wind down, but a lot of folks that I talk to, and at least in Central Illinois, have been done for a couple of weeks at least. And I'm sure that's, except for maybe parts of the upper Midwest, the story over the rest of the Corn Belt. And those winter wheat fields will get moisture that's been sporadic and scattered, but I think we'll see improvement down the line there here in the weeks to come too.
Yeah, really seeing most everything out of the field here in northern Illinois as well. But lots of rain hitting that west coast. Is that's going to improve? You think that drought pretty significantly up that way, or is it just going to stay out in the ocean and not really come inland that far?
No, that actual low itself and what we call little pieces of energy will continue to work on inland. So it's wave after wave. It's this big, almost, it's a very photogenic storm, to put it in that perspective. When you take a look at it in the visible satellite pictures, or you monitor cloud tops, or a lot of colors to them. Maybe I'll do the old Tim Russer thing. Maybe you can see this. I'll do this, but this would be the satellite picture from this morning, and didn't get the chance to get one up, but we'll put it up like that. You can see two areas, actually, this photogenic storm up through the Pacific Northwest. All I need now is a clipboard. And that beige, this red area down here, you can see outside of the Eastern Gulf in Florida, that is actually the remnants of Sarah. With an R-A, not an A.
I was going to say, Sarah spelled the other way. Let's not get us confused.
Bringing more moisture down there. So, lots of headlines already on the weather scene. So we'll continue to move forward here. And here is the upper air pattern. You know how we like to put together, if you're building something, you got to put the foundation in before you can put the roof on and call it a day or a shed. So here is the weather pattern. It's pretty straightforward. If you see the green lines, just assume everything kind of moves west to east. Anytime you see those green lines squinched together, that's a lot of wind up aloft. It gets transported and translated downward. And you can see out across California that hook, if you will, that U-shape configuration, trough, close low. That just means systems are just racing in off not only the Gulf of Alaska, but off the open waters of the Pacific as well. That's why they call it the atmospheric river. At times when the jet stream in an El Nino setup moves all the way down into Hawaii, that's when we kind of label it as a Hawaiian or pineapple express, although there's not a lot of pineapple, if I remember now, still being grown down in Hawaii. In any event, you can see systems in from the west. The jet stream winds are kind of west to east, but they're suppressed southward. If you're a weather forecaster, you can see that the middle part of those ribbons of lines are packed together. So there's wind, that's the polar jet. So if you are from the northern plains to the upper Midwest, it's going to get colder. If you're from Texas to the Gulf Coast, that H down there is the summertime hot ridge still holding on. So you've got a wide disparity of temperatures, fast-moving weather systems, a trend towards probably some colder weather into the upper Midwest and northern plains and Corn Belt for Thanksgiving and a little beyond, but nothing barbaric or out of control. Kind of a shock to the system coming off the warmth of late. And if you are looking for the warmth, head down to Old Mexico, the Rio Grande, the Gulf Coast, And in between, no shortage of moisture. There'll be fast moving systems, but the main story is still into early to mid next week, significant amounts of moisture for California. This is kind of the surface look at things through the 27th of November. That would be the last panel in the bottom middle there. And you can see how systems are just wound up, those lows, how the red lines, the isobars are packed together, one system after a system after a system, coming in almost 24 hours, a new low, a new low, a new low. So we're not done with this by any means through early to mid next week out west. Meanwhile, you can see a couple of cold fronts, those hash-shaped triangular blue lines making their way out of the northern plains through the Corn Belt into the Great Lakes. You can see another low over the northeast in New England. So with time, we do get into some colder, more typical late November, early December weather. No big storm around here through the Corn Belt and through the plains. So if you can work through some of the muddiness and if you can deal with the wind and the cold, a little more livestock chill stress, and nothing worse, then most of the action is in the northeast, New England, and across the western states for the foreseeable future. Not much going on in the tropical waters of the Pacific, or I should say the Atlantic. And yeah, the hurricane season ends on the 30th of November, at least from a bookkeeping statistical standpoint. Mother Nature doesn't follow that, of course. So, but we think for now, with all the wind up aloft, that things are going to quiet down. Could have an extra tropical system or two form up over the far southern Atlantic, but none of those will be impacting at least North America and the United States. You can see that kind of a little bright shrill of clouds off the Yucatan Peninsula, that southwestern part of the Caribbean over towards Florida. That is what's left of Sarah. In the Pacific waters, nothing going on. You can see some of the cloudiness associated with the big storm in the western, at least off of California and the eastern Pacific out there. So the next 24 hours, again, there you can see really three areas: the Pacific West, the Northern Sierra, the Cascades. A foot of snow a day, 5 to 7 inches of rain in the lowest elevations in the lower areas of Northern California, the northern valley locales, if you will, Sacramento Valley, and into the Pacific Northwest. You can see moisture that's primarily rain for the Northeast of New England, and that's actually something that a lot of forecasters, and I've actually missed it a couple of times, not mentioning it on air, on TV. They've had fires. They've had a lot of fire issues into New York State and New England, like we have in the plains and the Corn Belt. When you get dry, tender vegetation, low afternoon humidity, you're in a dry weather pattern. In any event, you get fires that break out there too. And at least that moisture is of significance the next 24 hours. And that will be a snow rain mix as far south as maybe Terre Haute and Indianapolis and Champaign and Kankakee, and maybe some accumulation on colder surfaces when we get a little snow mixed in as well. Now, I think the roads will be okay. They're just too warm. We're coming off 50s and 60s and very warm soil temperatures. There's no frost or freeze in the ground whatsoever. In any event, Great Lakes areas, rain, snow, little rain down through the Tennessee Valley, much of the western Corn Belt and the plains. This is the next 7 days, by the way. And you can see we're off the charts here. If I squint, that's probably 15 to 20 inches of rain the next 7 days. That began last night. That totaling starts from last night. That would have been the 19th, out the next 7 days through the 26th of November. And so there is more to come out there through California, the Pacific Northwest, especially northern and central California, the Central Sierra, Tahoe, Reno, up into the Rogue River Basin and Willamette Valley, Sarah, of the Pacific Northwest. Those are big ag areas of the Pacific Northwest. So those structures hold up okay. The moisture is appreciated, but those winds come ashore at 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. And then that's why you have power outages in some of the big metro areas of the Northeast, I should say, of the Pacific Northwest, Western Washington State, and Oregon.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy stuff when it gets to be all that moisture and then the wind on top of it.
Exactly. And yeah, that is a typical trademark of this transition out of a neutral state atmosphere to a La Nina, and I think is probably just the beginning of what's going to be a stormy weather pattern for the Pacific Northwest. I think with time, California moves into a drier situation, but we'll take a look at the longer range stuff going forward. As a matter of fact, we'll get into some of the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day maps and charts here, and coming on up. And this is kind of the government for this little chart here. It's just the hazards, if you will, will. You can see the main issues through California with wind and rain, high wind to the Pacific Northwest. There is some frost and freeze potential here over the next 2 or 3 nights as far south as that Interstate 10 and 20 corridor through the mid-Delta region, parts of the interior southeast into the mid-Atlantic, southern mid-Atlantic region. Don't think this will have anything. I think winter vegetables and crops are just getting put in. The grounds are warm. This should not be a detriment. There's no issues regarding fruit trees. Obviously, that's a situation in the springtime we tend to monitor, but it is the start to the frost and freeze season. A little premature over the southeastern part of the country, but nothing to really rewrite headlines. So on to the longer range stuff here. These green squiggly lines are back in, but it's the steering currents. The winds up aloft, they kind of run parallel to these lines. We could get into a whole bunch of dynamic meteorology, what they really tell you. But in any event, you can see really that bending, that U-shaped trough over the middle part of the country back into the southwestern reaches of the country. If you go upstream or to the left, you can see kind of some red dashed lines, a little arcing. That is high pressure pull off. That is finally towards Thanksgiving when we move into a drier weather picture for the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. At the same time, if you wanted to kind of pencil in and trace lines that would run from the top of that panel, the North Pole region, follow those lines down into central Canada, that's as far south as really the Arctic air goes. So that's good news. And then it loopsy-doo back across the northern Atlantic and the North Sea. And then you can see the winds that come up out of the southwestern part of the country at southwest and northeast flow. That's usually a lot of cloudiness, fast-moving systems, a propensity for some wetter weather, including some snowfall for the central and southern plains and parts of the Corn Belt. Don't see a big deal, big system coming into the Midwest. What we do see is a transition towards Thanksgiving to some colder weather, and then we'll get into these mixed systems moving forward into the early part of December. But for now, nothing really ramped up on the maps and charts. Government forecast here, the 6 to 10 day outlook, which shows some pretty good agreement. We don't have any beef with this thing, the cold air, and this panel would be a real good snapshot of how we anticipate this relatively quick La Nina pattern to break out and develop and intensify quickly through early to mid winter and then wind down late winter into early springtime. So we have a pretty much wide range of weather expected over the next probably 4 to 6 months across, especially the plains and Corn Belt locales. But there's still some lingering warmth, if you will, relative to average. So we're not done with these milder days, maybe not necessarily 50s and 60s, but if daytime averages are in the 30s and 40s, add 5 to 10 to that, and you can see that it is still a pretty mild weather pattern for the eastern and southern Corn Belt, down through Dixie in the southeastern states. And from a moisture standpoint, anytime you get that range of temperatures, but over a short distance, you come up with this, and we talk about it in the TV show, and it just gets the winds to strengthen up aloft. You drive moisture into these varying air masses, and so the 2 separate areas of moisture. Welcome snow again. What was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? Was it New Mexico, parts of Colorado had 40 inches of snow, and that actually did and will continue to improve soil moisture levels over the southern high plains area. So there's more to come here through Thanksgiving in the central parts of the Rockies, the Great Plains, much of the plains for that matter, and another significant system expected at some point. That's probably about 7 days out from now, but over the Ohio Valley and sections of the eastern Corn Belt. So good news with moisture issues, lack of moisture in the soils, and the opportunity to get them in outside of field work before frost and freeze goes into the ground. So over the next 14 days, next 2 weeks through early December, this is again modeled data based on what the 6 to 10 day is going to be kicking out here. But we take a look at the upper air, then we're able to put the surface together, and you can see kind of a northwest to southeast flow. If you can see those red dashed lines, there's milder air working into the Gulf of Alaska, the western parts of the hemisphere, western sections of the United States as well. So this will not be a long period of stormy weather in the Pacific West, especially California. I think with time, we'll get it going into Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest as we get deeper into December and wintertime. And you can see how the winds kind of buckle over the middle part of the country. That would imply weather systems coming out of the central plains up the Ohio. The cold air is there, but it's not really bodily diving southward. It makes it into the northern plains and northern Great Lakes region. So there is probably the likelihood of some recurring snowfalls, these rain to snow, over to rain, back and forth. No big deal. Systems out of the central plains and central Corn Belt and Dixie in the southeast, especially Florida, still stay warm. And we're probably not done with severe weather down there, even into early December. Over the Gulf Coast area. So there's a little better push of some colder weather. This is not any Arctic air coming southward. We're probably looking at single digits at night through Montana, the Dakotas, Canadian Prairie, a little bit below average there, and a little more typical early December feel for the Corn Belt and the plains. And if you needed to get into the warmth, head down through Florida. And the moisture pattern as well, no worse than normal over much of the country. There's still a likelihood of some wetter weather for, would you believe, they actually need it coming off the spat of hurricane season, hurricane storms over the southeast. So that Delta region east of the Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, and westward need moisture. And except for that ribbon, that corridor that had all the damage and flooding through the western Carolinas down into Georgia from hurricane activity, a lot of the area was really missed out on meaningful rainfall. So if they can work with cleanup and recovery through a wetter pattern, that's the story over the southeastern part of the country. So, Sarah, that's kind of the perspective put together from the feds and thinking from the weather guy around here. And we have an updated winter outlook we'd like to share for you here. That'll take us through into February. And we'll have a couple of comments about early springtime as well.
Well, let's talk the winter forecast. So far, it looks pretty typical going here through early December. So what can we expect ahead?
Well, here we go. We'll take a look now at the look of things. There we go. And overall, the picture continues to be almost the same layout that we see. This is December, maybe you're up to and about the New Year's holiday spell. And there's some colder weather and even very cold weather through the southern Canadian prairie. The more we can add snow cover and snowpack down, I think that will be over the next 2 or 3 weeks. For Montana, the Dakotas, the southern Canadian prairie, the more likelihood that these air masses, the cold Canadian air masses, they like to migrate, refrigerate themselves, if you will, and they migrate towards these colder areas of snow-covered fields. And so there you have it. If you're looking for a harsh winter to start, Canada, there's some tendency for some cold air to settle into the plains. Nothing out of control, nothing that gets livestock operations all worked up. Very much a manageable situation. There's still a likelihood of some milder air all the way into the eastern and southern Corn Belt at times. Again, this is not a complete snapshot about how each and every day, by the way, will play out. This is the averages of temperatures, and when we get to the moisture pattern as well, and the jet stream configuration, it'll oscillate back and forth, but this is kind of the average look to the maps and charts that we'll see here for the month of December. And for precipitation, no shortage of it, where there's more snow forecast for the Pacific Northwest primarily, Central Rockies. These are still drought areas too, so we'll add ability to get a snow melt season and have a reservoir situation that continues to improve itself through California and the Pacific Northwest when we get deeper into spring and early summer. And the likelihood that we're back and forth between these rain to ice to snow. They may start as rain, go over to some snow, back over to rain, go over to these back and forth things, probably from about I-70, I-80, somewhere up at the southern Great Lakes region. So there's moisture in one form or another, nothing unusual. These will tend to be faster moving, quicker systems. We don't foresee big winder uppers, if you will. So manageable out there. We should have several days lead to when these things do materialize across the plains and Corn Belt locales. The normal moisture for the southern plains, that's good news. And into the mid-Atlantic region, a little drier trend down through the Gulf Coast. It's been actually part of the central Gulf Coast, east of New Orleans to about the Florida Panhandle. Some spots had about 5 to 8 inches of rain over the past 5 to 7 days since late last week because of severe weather and recurring storms down there. In any event, here we go into the January 2025 outlook, and the cold air becomes a little more established, more days than not when we're below average over much of the Corn Belt, the Great Plains, and we're fighting sub-zero cold at night and a struggle sometimes to get past zero, especially where there's snow on the ground from Montana, the Dakotas. And remember, I believe last year as well, we did not have a significant snow season for the northern plains and southern Canadian prairie that led to dryness and drought. And that was prior to or at least in the wake of that, it was fires that we had last summertime season and dryness up through the Canadian prairie. So this is kind of good news. And those folks are accustomed to it. And temps will tend to vary from Texas to the Ohio Valley with these fronts that kind of waffle. First they're a cold front, then they're a warm front. Anytime we can get things to move through in this configuration where the winds are bent from, let's say, Kansas and Oklahoma into the St. Lawrence River Valley, that's a trough. And usually east of the trough is where you get the moisture. And by golly, there's the way it's going to go. That's the storm track, if you will. And it's a pretty typical one for early to mid winter time, and B, for a quickly strengthening La Nina setup out of Northern California. We think there'll be a trend towards lesser winter moisture out there. So, while it's appreciated, I think with time we may not get exactly what we want out through California, the central and southern Sierra, and the southern mountains from, again, a moisture of availability standpoint, getting those streams and rivers, those reservoirs to fill up when snowmelt gets going in the springtime season. No shortage of snow. Nebraska, much of the Corn Belt into the St. Lawrence River Valley, there's a tendency to have these mixed bag systems that originate from about the I-40 corridor up to the I-70 run from St. Louis to Columbus, and then point south and east from there. Normal precip for the Delta and southeastern part of the country, and dry and probably pretty warm as well, as you pointed out, over the deep south and southeastern sections of the country. So if we went forward into late winter, and probably might stretch this into early March as well. We'll just typically March 1 starts meteorological springtime. It's a bookkeeping thing. We keep everything on the first of each month, every 4 months in advance. So here it is. There's still kind of an indication that will be the height of La Nina during February into March. So two things: cold air, and a fair amount of it that stays around with the sub-average temperatures. There's no real significant gyration and movement of the steering currents and jet stream patterns. So I think when we get locked into this, we're going to get locked into this. We may ebb and flow a little bit on temps from time to time, but basically a cold mid and early, and especially midwinter to late winter, I think is the best way to label it across the Corn Belt, the plains. There's a tendency for warmth, but you have all that warmth and the high humidity and the dew points, the deep south, and a variance of temperatures of that southwest to northeast jet stream pattern. You come up with this, no shortage of it. We'll probably drive the snow and ice and the run to the grocery store all the way down to Oklahoma City, Little Rock, maybe Nashville and Chattanooga. Ought to be a pretty good snow cover and snow pack to melt away with time over the plains, much of the Corn Belt into the upper Midwest, and more normalized moisture for the south and southeastern sections of the country. So nothing really, off the charts here. No, nothing new to report, Sarah, on the forecast around here. It's pretty much classic textbook stuff. Nothing that really had a lot of, at least more so than usual, head scratching going on in the weather office around here. So that's pretty much the story, that things continue to point and be very favorable, I think. We got harvest done. We're going to begin to cool soils for anhydrous application. Livestock managers are going to have opportunities to get where they need to be before, and things sheltered in supplies before we get into the rough aspect of a winter time around here. So just let it happen, I guess. Get out and enjoy it. It's just December, it's January and February. I'd rather have it snow there than versus March or April here across the parts of the heartland.
Exactly. Of course, it's weather. It all can change at any point as well. We didn't have a question, but we did have a comment come in, Greg, and the farmer from Virginia just said, "Thank you for the information and keep up the great work." So wanted to pass that along. You've got, I know you've got lots of fans out there, but
one more check in the mail, as we say. So
there you go. Right. There you go.
and that's why, yes, you make a good point. That's why, yes, weather changes. And that's why we turn up each week with Mike Pearson, and once in a while, a guy called Armstrong will turn up and provide you with all the ag news and stuff that's coming out of the markets and weather and all that on This Week in Agribusiness. So we'll have that 4-week forecast that gets us well into December here on the coming weekend show. And we'll certainly keep you up to date and look forward to getting back in touch with you and meeting up with you again in December.
Very good. Yeah, you can catch Greg each weekend on This Week in Agribusiness with Mike Pearson, Max Armstrong, RFD TV. So you can tune in and watch that. It's also on our website, so you can check it out there as well. Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us with this month's forecast, and we'll catch up with you here in December.
All right. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. Thank you all for joining us as well. We appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.